Our speaker is Jeffrey Ellis Aronin. He's an architect. His office is in New York City. In case you haven't seen, he's speaking on climate and architecture, and I think the book here, which you'll find in our library, will attest to the fact that he's an expert in the field of climate and architecture. I think the two of the faculty who were with me in South Bend last year will also attest to the fact that he's an expert on 2000 AD. He was part of a symposium up there discussing what architecture will be in the year 2000. He was educated in London, England, and schools in New York and in Woodmere, New York. He attended the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Canada, and McGill University in Montreal, Canada. He holds memberships in the, interestingly, I think this is the first man we've had as a speaker who was a member of the American Arbitration Association, the American Institute of Architects. He has been chairman of the Speakers Bureau for the New York chapter of the AIA. He has been a member of the New York Society of Architects, the New York State Association of Architects, the National Institute for Architectural Education, architectural institutes in Mexico, Canada, British American Chamber of Commerce, Swedish Chamber of Commerce of the United States, and the Danish American Society, the American Scandinavian Foundation. He is a guest of honor, has been a guest of honor of the Venezuelan Society of Architects. He has lectured at many schools around the country. He has been a guest on numerous radio and television programs, including Faye Emerson's show, Mike Wallace, Arlene Francis, The Eye on New York, and so forth. He has been a moderator of two programs on architecture. His last show ended last June. He spoke for a half an hour interviewing people such as Frank Lloyd Wright on this New York station once a week for a half hour. He has served on many commissions, both for the AIA and for New York State and the City of New York. So it's with great pleasure that we welcome Mr. Aronin here to Ball State tonight.
Dean Sappenfield, distinguished guests, fellow architects, members of the student members of the AIA, non-members of the student AIA, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your kind introduction, Dean Sappenfield. I was interested in your introduction and your stress on Scandinavian organizations, because like you, I'm Danish by extraction. As you know, my dentist is Danish. It is a great pleasure for me to come here today. When I was first invited last summer, this date seemed so far away. I was delighted because here was an opportunity for me to prepare an address so far in advance. But it seems to be a practice, however, and I've noticed it from my days when I attended university, that architects are always on a charrette. I don't know, do they have them down here? Ball State? And last fall, I thought I'd better get going on the preparation of this talk. Two things were in my favor. First of all, back in October, we gained an extra hour by switching back to standard time. And secondly, we were blessed with a holiday on election day. And the third point was not so easy. I usually like to bring Benjamin Franklin into my lectures, And frankly, I don't know what he has to do with Ball State, except that in connection with the basketball Cardinals, as you all know, he was the head artesian juvenile, the water boy. But, you know, Benjamin Franklin was everything. He was a printer, a philosopher, businessman, politician, statesman, humorist, scientist, and inventor. He started so many ideas and invented so many contraptions in the United States that are still being used. As a matter of fact, he formulated the concept of daylight saving time, to which I've just alluded. Nowadays, so many inventions, both wonderful inventions and awful inventions, come into being that we are apt to think that we are improving our lot. In many respects, we are. But with the advances in technology, we are also losing sight of some of the basic knowledge which our forefathers knew. While I do not for one moment pretend to be an authority on Franklin, I do not feel that he would let inventions enslave him the way they have done to us today. As one example, Benjamin Franklin related in Poor Richard's Almanac in 1757, 211 years ago, and I was reading it again just today on the plane. He talked about an invention he devised for making a striking sundial, by which not only a man's own family, but all his neighbors for 10 miles round may know what time it is when the sun shines without seeing the dial. It worked by having a series of guns at the sundial, so arranged that when the shadow hit the 1 o'clock mark, one gun would fire. When it hit the 2 o'clock mark, two guns would fire. When it hit the 3 o'clock mark, three guns would fire, and so forth. 78 guns were used in all in this arrangement. Now, Franklin said about this that it is relatively cheap because the cannon he bought would last 100 years. The only expense would be the powder, and during cloudy days there would be a great saving anyway. Other inventors might have gotten all wrapped up on such an invention, but not Franklin. He admitted that it is indeed a good thing to know how the time passes, but this kind of dial, notwithstanding the mentioned savings, would be very expensive and the cost greater than the advantage. Let all learn, he cautioned, that many a private and many a public project are like this striking dial, great cost for little profit. We have, in my opinion, too many striking sundials today. We have too many buildings, air-conditioned, but which, if properly designed, would not need them, or would at any rate not require such large cooling bills. We have too many cities planned totally without respect to the climate, and indeed our entire environment, consequently costing us millions of dollars. In fact, on the first slide, a cartoon, can I operate the slide myself? What do I do? This cartoon from the English magazine Punch amply illustrates the sort of mess we've got ourselves into. As architects, we are constantly inventing, but ours is not merely a technical science, but a human one too. And I would like to discuss with you this evening some of the ways we can make the most of our natural environment so that human beings can be climatically comfortable all year round without using some of the mechanical gadgets that have engulfed our markets. Now, perhaps you may ask, why? Why all the fuss? The Madison Avenue boys tell us that we have the highest standard of living in the world. We are indeed rolling along quite merrily, but we must, as architects, look ahead and think of the broader picture we play in our society as well as our narrow specialties. First of all, it's very necessary that we utilize some energy source other than our present fuels. In 1952, the President's Materials Policy Commission, headed by William Paley, reported that the steady drain of resources of this nation, combined with the increasing cost of raw materials, would imperil the economy and security of the country by 1975, just 7 years from now, unless corrective steps were taken. The real danger, according to the Commission, lay not in running out of raw materials, but in the continually rising costs of taking resources from the earth and transforming them into useful products. By the way, this situation has already been reached in England, where the energy used to mine coal is almost equal to the energy derived from the coal that is mined. It appears, therefore, to be of definite national importance that we conserve our fast dwindling coal and oil supplies for defense and other necessary purposes, and that we obtain our present fuel sources from the sun, from the air, from the ground, as in the case of the heat pump, and from the wind. And apart from being necessary, it is profitable for us to use the climate. When we use oil, gas, coal, or any of the fossil fuels, we are using up an expendable resource. We are using up a resource with any conventional heating or cooling system, and even with, as yet, the unconventional one, as where atomic reactors are the power source. No matter how small a quantity of fissionable material may be in the reactor, it is still being used up. We're using up our capital energy when we use fossil fuels, for there's only a certain amount left in the earth. On the other hand, when we use solar energy, we are using an income energy that is plentiful and inexhaustible. Thirdly, it is for architects very just and honorable to make the climate work for us, for climate can very well influence our search to produce regional architecture. If we would recognize climate in our designs the way native civilizations have, and all the civilizations have done so throughout the world, our American towns and cities would not look the same as they do right across the continent. As has been brought to our attention in the last decade, since the space age started, we live at the bottom of a great ocean of air. And that it has the climate influences everything we do in all walks of life. That it has a profound effect on architecture is evident by the examination of native dwelling types, because one of the prime purposes of a building in the first place is shelter. Basically, we have two extremes of climate in the world, the very cold ones at the poles and the hot one at the equator. Yet it is a curious thing that the natives in all these regions have developed in their own way and using indigenous building materials, the same building form, a hemisphere, as witnessed in the Eskimo igloo and the mud huts of the equatorial areas. In both the igloo and the mud hut, there is an absence of openings designed to slow up the transfer of heat. The interior of the igloo, being concave, concentrates whatever heat there may be on the occupants. The exterior of a mud hut, being basically convex, disperses the heat and keeps the inside relatively cool. If native civilizations have been able to master the climate in their own primitive way, why can't we? Well, the climate of much of the United States is not as simply defined as in the polar or equatorial regions, because in most of the country you are confronted with subarctic weather part of the year and subtropical weather in the rest. So many factors as the sun, temperature, winds, precipitation, and humidity influence a building design. But certain things are obvious. Take Lever House in New York as a case in point. You all know it. It's the ultimate in curtain wall construction, even though it is now 15 years old. It certainly is a great contribution to the development of the skyscraper, and it favorably influenced the design of many buildings still going up, especially with regard to the setback idea. But was it necessary to put glass on all four walls? Absolutely not. Different forces exert themselves on each orientation. The south aspect is, of course, the hottest, the north one the coolest. The south has the sun hitting it at angles different than those for the east or west exposures. Why all the glass? It does not do any good for interior illumination, for if you ever go inside that building, you will see at any time of the day, on any day of the year, that all the lighting fixtures are illuminated. So we need to reevaluate the function of the window. These are other photos of other glass buildings elsewhere in the world. Now, what is a window? Is it used for ventilation, outlook, light? Today, a window is mostly for outlook. Even in glass wall buildings, lighting is by artificial means. Ventilation may be through air grills and ducts or through the window openings themselves. However, large openings are not necessarily needed. What is the best shape for a window? For light, for outlook? Higher windows lengthen the depth of light penetration into a room. Higher windows permit unobstructed vision from sitting or standing positions. Smaller windows mean more comfort for pedestrians outdoors and occupants of neighboring buildings. Punched-hole windows permit the use of exterior walls for workspace and storage. Smaller windows mean less washing and less maintenance cost. Pierced windows permit greater variety of functional exterior designs, colors, textures. An all-glass wall can be as monotonous as an all-masonry wall. Punched-hole windows permit better and more economical comfort and functional control for the occupants. As wind is a cooling agent, winter heating load is reduced by keeping the wind off the glass. This is accomplished by vertical fins on glass walls or by recessing windows into the building envelope so that there is a protective surface film of air. Heating and cooling units may be placed conveniently directly below punched-hole windows. Pierced windows permit ducts and services on the exterior walls. Every square foot of extra glass adds $5 to the cost of air conditioning. 12,000 BTU per square foot per hour of solar heat gain means another ton of air conditioning. And this shows the heat load is different on different walls, something which I'm sure you all know, as the others. It is said that form follows functions in good architecture, but does a glass wall define what happens on the inside? Now, some of you may have visited the Secretariat building of the United Nations, where the end walls, the blank end walls, have offices, but right up the middle of the glass sides, the ladies' toilets are located, and they command a most magnificent view of the whole island of Manhattan. I haven't been in them recently, but during construction they had quite a good view. And so we see, I hope so at any rate, that many buildings we design have windows that bear no relation to the climate. Consequently, buildings in cities across the entire North American continent resemble one another very closely. I've seen glass buildings like this in Winnipeg, Canada, and others in Houston and Montreal. This is in Brussels, Belgium, at the fair. All of the Mies van der Rohe naked skin and bones type of design. And that reminds me, with the possible exception of a tree, and only God can make a tree, in anything that is alive, the bones do not show. They only show in dead things. Do we want a dead architecture or a live one? Well, enough about what is wrong with today's buildings. And I must admit that my own firm is sometimes guilty of these unsound practices. Let us look ahead at the basic procedure for molding our buildings to the climate. The fundamentals can be broken down into 1, a wise selection of the site, and 2, a wise location of the building on the site. Clients should seek out their architects before purchasing a site. The land should be selected not only according to economic considerations, its basic desirability, its proximity to transportation and so forth, but also with regard to its climatic qualities. This is not an easy task. Climatically, distances may vary within short distances. The small space climate or microclimate at a given location may vary considerably from that at the meteorological station recording the data for the vicinity. The temperature here at the university may vary considerably from that recorded at the Muncie International Airport. Even within a building they vary. I'm told that at Ball State's railroad station that you can be much warmer on the upper floors than on the lower ones. To give you an idea of the extent to which they may vary, in New York City during the winter months, temperatures may run 20 degrees lower in Long Island than in Newark, New Jersey, distance of 8 miles or so. The northern suburbs of New York City get 7 inches more precipitation annually than those areas in southwestern Long Island. As I inferred earlier, the climate in the vicinity of Lieber House or any glass building may be quite depressive compared with that enveloping Central Park or the East River. Winds may have different directions imposed by the city's structure or by the buildings themselves. Without knowing such microclimatic patterns for different seasons of the year and for different times of the day, it is difficult to make a wise decision for the locations of buildings or for the zoning of a city plan. The third fundamental in molding our buildings to the climate is a wise basic design of the building. That is a good massing, so that the least exposure is given to the undesirable forces and the greatest exposure to desirable influences. The fourth fundamental is a good envelope on the exterior of the building. If by siting, massing, or design we cannot achieve climatic comfort, we can often do it by either natural devices, as trees, vines, or other vegetation, or by using artificial devices, as brise-soleil, overhangs, breathing walls, and so forth. Now, what exactly are the elements of the climate that we must consider in the architectural solution? First, the sun, which is the primary mover of all the other weather. Secondly, temperatures. Third, wind. Fourth, humidity. Fifth, precipitation. And lastly, lightning, earthquakes, and other elements of our environment. As we all know, the sun has beneficial effects on human beings, and it's particularly important to be exposed to it in the winter when daylight hours are not so long. It's rather good that in the winter the sun is relatively low in the sky, and when it is shining it will hit a building on its vertical surface. For in the northern populated areas of the United States, there is more insolation, spelled insolation, on south walls in winter than on the roof. In summer, the converse is true. So if you want to heat a building in winter by the elementary heat trap method, that is by trapping the sun's heat behind glass, put big windows on the south and try to keep the roof as small as possible for the greatest heat losses through the roof. However, there's no hard and fast rule on that, and as I described in my book, Climate and Architecture, at Purdue University, 2 identical houses were constructed, except one had a conventional window area, and the other had a large expanse of glass on the south side. What happened? The solar house required 16% more fuel than did the conventional house did during a December and January test period. There are many charts available, of course, to figure out the sun's position at different seasons. The tremendous powers that can be derived from recognizing the use of the sun were very well brought out at a conference I attended about 10 years ago in Phoenix, Arizona, sponsored by the Association of Supplied Solar Energy, and attended by 900 scientists from all over the world, even including Russia. And this is the exhibit, the sun at work. A copy of my book was on display. Now, this is an example, a simple example of the simple heat trap, a south-facing window, as in greenhouses. This one prepared by the Libby Owens Ford Glass Company. Basically, it's the windows facing south, and the heat is trapped behind, and it warms the animals, and it's a farmhouse. And then there is a use of a flat plate collector, which can be on a roof or wall. This is an Israeli device. And in it, there are copper tubes embedded in a black surface, and both are behind glass. The black surface absorbs the sun's rays and heats up the water passing through the tubes, which then may be used either in conventional space heating or in domestic hot water heating devices. In this device, steam was generated without difficulty. This chap developed what is called a selective radiation surface. Ordinarily, the collector efficiency decreases as the collector temperature rises, but some advances were made in this, and it proved that. Here are some other flat plate collectors. This is in Florida. Many houses in Florida have this sort of thing in the roof. This is a solar collector on a house in Colorado. This sort of thing lends itself very well to schools, because usually in the case of schools, there's an open space around the building and you can get the sun. But on an interior lot of a city street, you can't always use this sort of thing. Incidentally, you can store the heat when the sun doesn't shine, either in piles of rock buried underground or in something like Glauber's solution, which to those of us who take it is just another name for Epsom salts. This is a test house at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And this is an illustration of the MIT house. This is an Italian device for pumping water, which is very useful for irrigation purposes in desert regions. I believe it produces 5 horsepower of energy. Below the collector, you see the condenser, which must be shaded, and so it's in a good location. The loss of heat is accomplished by radiation to the sky and by convection to the atmosphere, and it only costs about $800. Here you see it pumping water. It's very good for desert areas where there's no other source of power. Now, apart from flat plate collectors, you can also make use of the sun by concentrating the sun's rays by means of reflectors, and we see here some examples. In general, the collection efficiency of concentrators is higher than for flat plates because the area of the absorbing surface is fairly small, and the heat can be used to great advantage. Now, here you see the plates, the mirrors on the right, reflecting the sun and burning a piece of wood over here. Archimedes used this to burn the sails of an enemy fleet, placed mirrors on the shore, and the sails were burnt. Of course, the enemy tricked him the next day. They came in at nighttime. There's an example of the wood is catching fire in this picture. And here is an example of how a portable oven can be carried in the form of an umbrella. Dr. George Lerf of Denver is shown with that, and it's working on the left, cooking some hot dogs. And here is a gentleman from India boiling some water. And this is a device from Japan, cooking rice. The inventor went to the local A&P and bought some minute rice. Took 45 minutes though to cook. And this is the wife of the ambassador from Lebanon. And for some reason, this was the most popular exhibit at the show. She's cooking some chops, I think, there. This is an oven in which the sun's heat can be stored. It reflects it onto the inside and is stored there. We may use all these devices in other ways in our architectural designs. And concentrating heat can produce tremendous results. This is a searchlight which instead of projecting light is receiving it, and this is the native Arizona pointing to it. The sun's heat is reflected on there onto a filament, and it was the only way they could at that time get temperatures high enough to melt some very rare metals that were used in space exploration. You can see the heating of it through that opening in the side. We can also use the sun to distill salt water, as seen in these slides. The sunlight comes through a transparent plastic film and warms the salt water, say seawater, on a black towel in the back. Some of the water evaporates, and this vapor collects on the cooler side, underside of the plastic film, from where it flows to a collecting tank. And the sun may be used too to, that's another solar still there. The sun may be used too to create electricity. The space satellites use that, where these silicon solar batteries are installed. These little discs up here are batteries, and these are. This is Vice President of Bell Telephone, and these are the inventors of the battery, and they can operate all kinds of machines shown below. I don't see any immediate application of this in architecture, although this cartoon appeared shortly after the silicon solar battery was first announced. It says, "Of course, darling, you are clever, and we do save on electricity, but the Joneses are coming to dinner, and the rotisserie won't work until that cloud goes away." Now, if you don't get quite the desired climatic effect on the building by design and orientation, you can modify the conditions by a variety of artificial and natural devices. Here are some of them. A shaded area. This is in Denmark at Louisiana Museum, opposite Sweden, near Elsinga. And this open type of shading device permits the air to come through. It gives a very pleasant effect. You can also use curtains. But here's another example of sometimes where big glass walls are very inefficient. At this MIT laboratory, the students just couldn't control the sun conditions, and they have a makeshift blanket to control the light. And here's some shading devices in these buildings by Harrison and Abramowitz at Brandeis University in Massachusetts. This is what your colleagues in Miami University, Coral Gables, Florida, probably doing this week. Nice warm weather, and but they need these shaded devices to keep the sun off. this house, the screen, designed by Marcel Breuer, shows a vertical Venetian blind, a brise-soleil, which can control the sun at given times of the day. It can shade the house. At other times, it would let the sun in. And of course, the air and the view is not interrupted. Here is a library in Cincinnati, which has fixed, excuse me, this is in Florida, which has fixed blinds. This is in Cincinnati, though, where the children's wing has these vertical blinds. Some fixed louvers in Mexico. Just a simple overhang. This one is at Taliesin West by Frank Lloyd Wright in Arizona. And here are some experiments being done at Princeton University in New Jersey. Now, together with the sun per se, architects must consider the buildup of temperatures. In this part of the country, which is liable to get quite hot in the summer, materials play a very important part in influencing temperatures. The temperature of the surface of a grass lawn may be about 80 degrees, but an adjoining concrete surface at the same time might be 40 degrees more, about 120 degrees. This is a paved area around the Secretary of Communications building in Mexico City. Water or wet surfaces are also cooler than dry ones because of their evaporative and reflective qualities. This beach scene shows reflections of different types of sand from the very wet to the very dry. Here is water in Taliesin West, which is very pleasant in the middle of the desert. It has some psychological advantage too. And in Mexico City. Another one in Mexico City. I don't think we use enough fountains in our public areas in the United States. Vegetation is also an excellent medium to produce climatic comfort. This is at Taliesin in Wisconsin. You can use vines on buildings. Nice thing about vegetation is that it comes out when you want it in the summer, and it goes away when you don't want it in the winter. If you want shade, though, this is the wrong way to achieve it. Colors, too, play an important part in producing climatic comfort. And I think we should use more colors in our cities across the country. because it's a very bleak, this type of weather we're having now. The snow gets dirty, everything, the sky is not always blue. And I think we could, not by such dynamic methods as this, but in subtler ways, we can use color to our advantage. Even on roofs. It's a funny thing, and we'll see in a slide later on. In America, roofs are one of the most important elements of design, and yet we pay so little attention to them. You look down on roofs from skyscrapers in New York, and you see very uninteresting surfaces. They should be properly designed as an integral part of the structure. This is an old building. This is at Harvard, but some attempt was made to introduce some design in the roof. This is Tivoli in Copenhagen. Use of small elements of color. Does that mean it's the next tray? Frank Lloyd Wright was very fond of color. This, unfortunately, is a recent picture of Taliesin. It's becoming very dilapidated. Harvard University, a little bit of color on the doors. California Mission. Even color on the windows. These old windows on Beacon Street in Boston. Very effective. Now, the third main element of the climate to consider is the wind. Wind is both a cooling and heating agent. It also has tremendous energy. In 1954, it was on Labor Day, I went swimming at Atlantic Beach, New York, on a beach ridden by destruction caused by a hurricane. I think it was Hurricane Carol, it was called. The seas had snapped concrete retaining walls as if they were matchsticks, and the wind had caused untold damage to property owners. It is said that the energy generated by this storm equaled the total output of all the world's mechanical heat generators. It is unfortunate that it could not have been used constructively, for winds of more moderate intensity can be used as a source of power. They've been doing it for centuries in the Low Countries by using windmills. We'll see that in a moment. But in this beach scene, an auto graveyard, which had been there for at least 30 years, was uncovered. Possibly those of you who know cars better than I do can tell the dates of these, but it's very interesting how some of them were very well preserved. You could even turn the wheel, the driving wheel. This is some of the damage caused by the winds and the sea and the hurricane. Most of the damage, by the way, in hurricanes is not caused by the wind itself, but by debris that has been loosened and that knocks against the building. I wasn't the architect of this building. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright even recognized the use of windmills. He had it on his own farm, nicely designed. And Thomas Jefferson was very interested in the wind. He was very conscious of it in siting his Monticello home in Virginia. It was sited in such a way that as a cool surface of air develops in the evening on the side of the hill, it was made to flow down the side and was channeled into areas that he used for his wine cellars. Here is a Windvane that he used on his porch, and underneath is, he could tell the direction of the wind by looking at the direction inside, underneath on the porch ceiling. This is one of the air tunnels that he has there. And he also kept the wind off by this, when necessary, by a triple hung window, not a double hung, but a triple hung, which is rather good. A joint of a double hung or triple hung window, as you know, is a very effective sealer against the elements. And also, this one doesn't have the objections that double hung windows do, because the joint is in a double hung window is usually just at eye level. And here you can see through the center portion. Sometimes you want wind to go through a building, and you can, and yet have the shading effect. You can have these open concrete blocks, a breathing wall. Here they are on a hotel in Florida. Now, the fourth main element to consider is precipitation in the form of rain, snow, sleet, fog, smog, haze, smaze, and whatever other things meteorologists are apt to dream up. Precipitation can be of great assistance to architects. Snow has a great insulating quality. And I wonder sometimes why we shovel it off the sidewalks and the roads, because the frost will not penetrate so deeply if you leave the snow there. Rain is an extremely good cleansing agent, so much so that Benjamin Franklin, to bring him back into the picture, made a number of studies on the subject. Of course, snow can pile up in unwanted places. Moisture can be damp and annoying. Sleet is hazardous, hail is dangerous, and flooding must always be considered. Right in my hometown, there's a public building whose first floor is a few inches below grade, and every time it rains, there's always a big flood. This is how a policeman in Mexico City shades himself from the rain. You know, this building over here is higher than the Empire State Building. Mexico City, of course, is 8,000 feet up in altitude. you certainly wouldn't want to have a lot of steps like these on the Massachusetts state capitol. They go off the picture on the bottom. In Massachusetts or in any other areas prone to snow. And yet, very often we make these errors in architecture. And these reflect very unfavorably on the architectural profession. Pause cartoons like this. It says, it's an American housing delegation. Yankees don't know how to build flood-proof homes. Well, this is how a beach on Long Island, the beach houses are built. They're raised up so that they are flood-proof. This is a home designed by Peter Blake. Also, in the case of hurricanes, the sea would go right through and out the other side. And no debris would damage the building itself. And as I mentioned before, wood is a much more effective material to use than concrete. It has resiliency. Now, the Romans knew how to recognize the climate. Here's some examples in the north of England, in a town near Newcastle called Costopatum. It was a Roman town. A lot of different buildings seen here. This is the first floor of the building. These areas below are the cellar. And through these corridors, hot air was channeled, hot air created by stoves. It was a radiant heating device that they had 2,000 years ago in England. Probably had a better heating system there then than they do now. But they also had, for precipitation, they had very effective drains and gutters in the street. Oh, this is the view in the cellar. You can also keep water away by dams. And this is an effective use of a dam in a dike rather, in Holland, where it's used effectively as architecture and not just as a big concrete monument. Now, this is a picture of a snow fence at the University of Manitoba. I didn't wait for the snow to come. It's very cold up there. You think it's cold down here, but when I went to school in Manitoba, we used to walk around when it was 30 below all January. And the cameras used to freeze up. But anyway, what I want to point out is that snow fences are designed to stop the snow, because the snow will always accumulate in the lee, on the lee side. If you put an obstruction on a building, the snow will always pile up there. And that's what will happen if you design doors on the wrong side of a building. This is a barn in Vermont. The snow you will see snow on this side, but not on the other, due possibly to two reasons. One, that this was the lee side, and the other one was the south side and was heated up. Curiously, I received a Christmas card this year from the Swedish Institute of Building Research in northern Sweden, which had a profile showing how snow accumulates in Sweden, and it was exactly the same as this, something that sometimes people may overlook. This is a thatched roof. It has the same effect as snow. The air inside of it can help insulate the building for many, many years, and something you can use using modern materials, plastics and so forth. You can experiment with. This is a ski resort in Vermont, and it shows again the influence of the sun. This one's to show you how cold it is, and this view, you see the girl in the bathing suit, is quite comfortable because of the radiant heat of the sun. Winnipeg, Canada, typical of many cities in North America, shows, I think, the precipitation is not used to advantage here. Now, I'm also reminded about the effects of precipitation. These signs near Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. You can't cover up mistakes with signs in architecture. Of course, around Muncie, you can't see the architecture because of the signs. But whatever you do should be done correctly from the beginning. This sign says, "Caution, icy spots ahead." It's a rectangular vertical sign. Then you go down the street a little further, it says, "Maybe icy spots ahead." Then to emphasize it further, you go down a little more, and there's a girl there too. Now, there's a lot of merit in using covered walks in urban areas. They had them in Shakespeare's England and in the covered wagon era of the United States. This is in Southport, a very nice Victorian city in England, and you can walk up and down the streets that are covered. I understand that a new city plan is being done for Muncie. Might be very worthwhile to consider something like that on the pedestrian areas. Here's a view of a similar thing in Bermuda. Forgot why I put that in. That's Felix Candela in an open-air market in using hyperbolic paraboloids in Mexico City. The fifth main element to consider is humidity, and especially humidity combined with some of the other factors. I will not dwell on that tonight, though. And the sixth would be other phenomena like lightning. You all know of Benjamin Franklin's remarkable research in this subject. In 1749, Franklin first proposed the single fluid theory of electricity, and his proof of the identity of lightning electricity and his curiosity about the electrical nature of clouds led to his significant invention of the lightning rod, which now, more than 200 years later, is still our only means of protection against the destructive and terrifying fire of the heavens. I'm on the lightning committee of the National Fire Protection Association, and the code is virtually exactly the same as the way Franklin proposed it. Of course, most of you are too young to have been at the AIA convention in Washington at the Centennial Convention in 1957. And Bennett Cerf, the humorist, was one of the guest speakers, and he told about his 11-year-old son who had to write an essay just listing the main points in the life of Benjamin Franklin. And he wrote this: Benjamin Franklin was a poor boy who grew up in Boston, but he was determined early in life to make his mark. And one day he set out for Philadelphia. He walked all the way to Philadelphia, and when he arrived there, he saw a pretty girl carrying a loaf of bread under her arm. He fell in love with her, he married her, and he discovered electricity. While earthquakes are not a phenomenon of the climate, they are a phenomenon of our environment. These photos show some of the damage that can be wrought through improper respect for the probability of earthquakes in areas prone to them. You can see how two walls meet one another. This is in Mexico City, and there's a cement filler in between, which would disintegrate without tearing down the wall in the event of a tremor. By the way, we used a modified version of that in skyscrapers in New York. You can't, in the high buildings, you cannot butt up the interior partitions against the exterior walls without some flexible connection. This is some earthquake damage in Acapulco. You can see some cracks in those walls. A church fell down, but the structure stayed up. Just the exterior wall was damaged, the envelope. This is the side of the Hilton Hotel in Acapulco. And the unfavorable nature of the ground, in Mexico, it's built on an old lake bed, and the walls settle at different rates. You have to have these vertical joints to prevent damage. Sometimes buildings are not to settle in such a way that they don't even remain perpendicular to the ground. Here the face of the building again was damaged, but not the structure. Now this, I thought I would end the talk with a warm note. This was in Tahiti Beach in Saint-Tropez, France. I would like to say that, to stress two things. It's very necessary that we live with the climate and not against it. Insofar as energy alone is concerned, according to the present rate of consumption, by 1975, just 7 years from now, we will be using about twice as much as we are today. And by the year 2000, we'll be using 4 times as much. Once taken out of the ground, we can never replace fossil fuels, and we won't be able to take it out quickly enough anyway. Secondly, if we consider climate in our designs, we are bound to come up with an architecture that is indigenous to the region where we build. We should consider the tools we are using. We shouldn't always compare ourselves with what other architects are doing, but should analyze our individual problem. And in that manner, I think our whole profession will profit. I want to thank you very much for inviting me here to be with you this evening. I've really enjoyed being with you.